what happened to the Palestinians is a mass atrocity. And I think Netanyahu has committed war crimes. If I gave the orders that Netanyahu gave or followed them, I would be court-martialed.
All these things that we talk about, that's not the type of stuff you hear when you're actually out at forums, that you hear people talk about cost of living primarily.
Surprisingly, the thing I've been hearing the most, to be honest, is ICE and immigration and the war.
24 hours after Swalwell dropped out, I started to hear and see, and in fact, there was a quick poll that went out in the field. Would you be willing to write in Kamala Harris for governor?
Oh, man.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the San Diego Politics Show. I'm your host, Matt Strabone. So happy you're watching. Today, my co-host, a man who enjoys bands named after animals, he's also the editor and general manager of the Times of San Diego, Andrew Keats, continues his series of interviews with candidates for California's 48th Congressional District, this time Ammar Campa-Najjar. But first, Andy and I are going to discuss the seismic shifts in the California governor's race. So Eric Swalwell has dropped out. It's a whole new ballgame. Tell me what you think.
Well, I think somebody might have been paying attention to your commentary on the race in the last few weeks.
Go on.
Well, there are a series of allegations made against Eric Swalwell, very serious allegations that we should not make light of in any way. However, they did all come out at once. And I can't help but remember that you have been saying for a while that somebody needs to do something to break up this logjam and ensure that Democrats are not shut out. And that, in fact, in a functioning system, that's what would have happened. And I wonder, did it?
Were they listening? Someone finally acted like a real political boss. That's true. Yeah, I mean, I think the event that needed to happen to get someone out of the race happened. I don't think any of us expected it would be the Democratic frontrunner, but here we are. Yeah. Now, he had been starting to lead a lot of these polls. Like he was starting to build a couple of percentage point, maybe even a 5 percentage point lead over his Democratic rivals. There seemed to be a crescendo of coalescing by some groups around him of late. And now like that, poof, he's out of the race.
That's right.
So it seems to me that we have to take into account where his support is going to go now. A lot of it may go to Porter, perhaps, or Tom Steyer. What do you think? Where do you think it's going to go?
I mean, I saw one internal poll, the results of which were made public, that said, sort of, asked people who their second choice was. And among the Swalwell people, I do believe that the largest recipient was Katie Porter, the second largest was Tom Steyer, and I think even it was the Steyer's folks who were making this seem as good news, that they were so much far ahead of Katie Porter that the extra votes would push them up a bit. I would say, I don't know how much I trust voters answering that question. The second choice feels more like a hypothetical, and especially a hypothetical that they haven't had to deal with yet.
Or think about
yet. And now they're going to, and when they do, they're going to do so with a campaign going around with people actively courting them.
That's right.
All of which is to say it's a completely different question now than it was then.
That's a great point. And, I think to that point, people are going to get much more time. They're going to have all the time in the world to figure out who they like instead if they were inclined to support Swalwell. Like you said, it's happening in the context of an actual campaign. They're going to see ads. They're going to be inclined to look some stuff up on their own. And I think it's anybody's guess. I think Swalwell occupied kind of his own niche lane the way all of these candidates are occupying a very small and strange niche in the race. Swalwell was the Bay Area guy. He was, kind of a mainstream Democrat. If you like someone who went on cable news and said rude things about the president, then you probably liked Eric Swalwell.
And there are a lot of those people in the Democratic voting base.
There are, and that's probably why he was ahead when he dropped out. But they got to go somewhere.
Well, and so now the Katie Porter of it all, I think it was mildly surprising to a lot of people who pay close attention to politics that she had sort of had such a failure to launch. She came in, she was a very high profile person, certainly as high profile as any of the other candidates in the race, including Eric Swalwell. Basically, the first thing that happened in the race was her no good, very bad TV interview where she started yelling at her staff. And she never really recovered from that. And not only did she not really recover, basically nothing happened. Right. It was just a period of long inertia. And, up until last week, if somebody asked if she was going to make a run, I would say, well, something needs to happen. There needs to be a force pushing her to do something, whether it's a new announcement or some sort of change in the state of the race. Well, that's happened now. And it kind of does seem like who if there's going to be a first rearrangement, it might be that voters start taking a look at her after, for whatever reason, they hadn't in the last 6 months.
That's true. I think there is an opportunity for that, and I think if we see a quick early bump towards Katie Porter, then I think that's exactly what's happening. Now, that being said, I do want to be cognizant of the fact that just like there were whispers about Eric Swalwell, about the things that ended up happening, there are whispers that there are more videos of Katie Porter yelling at staff and being rude to them. So if that's the thing that turned people off, if she starts to pull ahead, I think we can probably expect to see more of that come to light. Now, of course, that's speculative. Nothing's come out yet. But I also want to say, I think when she started her campaign, a lot of people were rather offended that when she ran for statewide office, the U.S. Senate specifically 2 years ago, and she lost in the primary, she immediately said that it was rigged against her. I think that offended a lot of Californian sensibilities, and that might represent a kind of ceiling that she's not able to overcome. I'm not sure, though.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do wonder how many people remember that. But it also does, it is the type of thing that smacks differently when you're dealing with a political world centered around Donald Trump, who says those sorts of things routinely, in which people are polarized against that sentiment in any way. Now granted, Stacey Abrams has said those things when she lost races, still remains beloved by a certain subset of Democratic voters.
Has never won an election, though.
Well, there's so much rigging going on. I mean, the other person to discuss here, and I guess this guy, I would say, is sort of in the same position that I described at the top about Katie Porter, which is Matt Mahan. I heard some early speculation that maybe middle-aged white man aiming himself as a centrist would, lose supporters to the other middle-aged white man aiming himself as a centrist. I do think Matt Mahan is running against sort of an old problem, which is a lack of a why. And despite having lots of money from Silicon Valley and a reasonable narrative for himself, mayors can position themselves differently than legislators. But still, I think it's really hard to get that first bump of support, and he hasn't really been able to get it. He's been stuck in that 4% range, which is not much to speak of at all.
That's true. Someone in that same range that I would like to talk about briefly is Xavier Becerra. Becerra has been consistently around 4 or 5%. There were also whispers after the Swalwell stuff dropped that some of the electeds and some of the endorsing groups may see if Becerra can now get a push forward, because he has a rather compelling resume. He was a cabinet secretary. He was the state attorney general in addition to being a congressman in the past. But he also has kind of had trouble getting out of the starting gate. Part of that, I think, is that there's another person in the race who has a similar profile in terms of geography. That's Antonio Villaraigosa. They're both Angelinos. They're both the two leading Latinos in the race on the Democratic side. I think it's entirely possible that they've been cannibalizing one another, and I don't think Villaraigosa is going to get out of the race. But there's an outside shot that Mahan might pick up Swalwell's votes. I think there's an outside shot that Becerra might pick up some of the outside support that Swalwell was getting. But all that being said, let's assume that the long shots are not able to break free. Now that we have Swalwell's 13 to 18 to 20 or whatever percent off the table, if most of it goes to Steyer and Porter, what I haven't heard anyone say is it's entirely possible that we have 2 Democrats in the top 2 and the Republicans get locked out. Am I crazy to say that?
I don't think you are. The only thing I would say is if that started to happen, I think Tom Steyer would start to use his infinite money to push Katie Porter down and to boost Steve Hilton. Probably. And try to do the old bank shot for the Democratic Party's top 2 bank shot.
It worked for Adam Schiff. I should say that I agree, and I think Steyer would have a much tougher road if he had to deal with a one-on-one with Katie Porter between June and November. I mean, obviously against the Republicans, certainly, but I think Tom Steyer against any Democrat for the entirety of the general election season would raise a lot of questions of Steyer that I'm not sure he wants to answer.
Yeah.
So but now that we've mentioned the Democratic top 2 potential, which I don't think is a huge possibility, but enough to mention, let's talk about how the Republicans have kind of shaken out here, because there's less of a danger now that we're going to have Republicans locking out Democrats in November.
Yeah, this is the other person who took your advice.
The President of the United States obviously watches the show and was like, I need to weigh in here, and has endorsed Steve Hilton. And I think the immediate polling we've seen after that suggests that Hilton is going to move ahead of Bianco and is if it looks like there's only going to be one Republican that gets ahead, if any, of course. Is that?
Yeah. Now, at the GOP state convention here in San Diego last weekend, the state GOP did not endorse in that race, did not follow the president's lead, which is a bit odd. I mean, in the Trump era, if there's one thing you can count on Republicans to do, it's to fall in line with what Donald Trump says. Now, they didn't in this race, notable. I certainly don't think that the California Republican Party's endorsement holds nearly as much sway as the president's endorsement. It's a party of one right now.
I think that's right. The last thing I want to mention about this race is that 24 hours after Swalwell dropped out, I started to hear and see, and in fact, there was a quick poll that went out in the field. Would you be willing to write in Kamala Harris for governor?
Oh, man.
I mean, let me just say this. It is true in a vacuum that statewide write-in campaigns have worked, but they have happened in other much smaller states. This state is far too big, I think, for a meaningful write-in campaign. And if you want to try to lock out Democrats from getting to November, getting Kamala Harris in as a write-in candidate might be just the way to do it. What do you think?
I mean, that would be the antithesis of the party boss clears the field, is the party boss introduces mass chaos and ensures lockout.
Yeah, let me be clear, that probably should not happen. Not that I'm taking sides on this, but I don't think it makes any rational sense. So let's leave it there. It is time for Andy's interview with Ammar. Enjoy the show.
And we're back with this week's interview. Joining us is congressional candidate in the 48th District, Ammar Campa-Najjar. Thanks for being here.
Good to be with you, man, and congratulations on the new role here at Times of San Diego.
Appreciate that. Well, so let's talk about your new role, which is a candidate in this race.
Yes.
So you've run twice in a district that overlaps, similar to this district, but not exactly this district, which was created through redistricting. And then in 2022, you ran for mayor of Chula Vista. Tell me, why did you decide to jump into this race for your fourth try at it?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I know we know each other. We've done a couple interviews before, but for those of you who don't know me, your audience, my name is Ammar Campa-Najjar. I am the proud son of Mexican and Palestinian immigrants. My father's an immigrant. My grandparents on my mom's side are immigrants. I'm a United States Naval officer in the reserves. I took time away from politics to join the military, go teach at Georgetown University. And, after Prop 50, people asked me to come back and run, and I wasn't sure, to be honest. I was happy and fulfilled with my life. But there's a deep reservoir of goodwill that has been generated throughout this district. As you know, I ran here before, and we built a grassroots movement from the ground up. There wasn't a lot of Democratic representatives in this part of the district, up in North County. And so when people were asking me to run, I thought about it, and I realized how deep that well of goodwill was, and that's why I decided to say, you know what? I do have something to contribute. I think we need to take big, bold swings at this stuff and fix it the way Trump broke it. I think we have to fix our government and fix our economy the way he broke it. He didn't take it by nibbling around the edges. So what makes me want to run again is I think I have a message that meets the moment and to help us complete the mission.
So on ICE specifically, in the, let's say, if you were to win this race, or if any of your Democratic competitors are in the race, I said this to Brandon Riker last week, that likely means that Democrats have taken control of Congress.
Right, hopefully the Senate.
Yeah, well, potentially the Senate. But, let's say it's either of those scenarios, but President Trump is still the president.
Right.
What can reasonably be done to rein in ICE here at the local level? What could you do to prevent a scenario like Minneapolis repeating here?
Trump was able to do what he did by not caring at all about the political calculus. He just swung for the fences. We have to do the same thing and fix it how he broke it. So I think when I get to Congress, I want to co-sponsor the No Kings Act, which means the president and vice president aren't above the law, overturning that Supreme Court decision. I want to introduce an amendment to codify Roe v. Wade. I want to introduce an amendment to get money out of politics with Citizens United. I think we need to have articles of impeachment against members of this administration who've broken the law. And I think we have to dismantle and overhaul this rogue agency and create a new one that could lawfully and ethically discharge the work of immigration. But I think this is not a moment for half measures. People have voted for Trump twice in this country because they prefer strong and wrong over weak and right. So let's just be strong and right.
Okay. Now, so that gets me to one of the things I wanted to put to you today, which is sort of some of the comments that you made in 2020. Now, in 2020, you were not new to the scene. You had already run for Congress once. We'd already, you and I already knew each other by that point. And so one of the things you said at that point, and I bring it up because you mentioned no half measures, let's go right at it, no King's Bill. You said on Facebook, I'm going to change to independent. I don't see myself in either party, frankly. You said, quote, my vote's still open. You guys think I'm going to vote for Biden? Not necessarily. I still want to see how they perform at the debate. Right. So as a developed, mature political thinker at that point, somebody who'd already, reached a point where they could run for Congress one time, close to the end of a second run for Congress. How could you get to that point where you weren't sure whether Biden or President Trump was the right choice, or whether you wanted to be part of the Democratic Party or an independent, to now where you say, no half measures. Let's go. Let's be as aggressive in pursuit of what we're saying as he is. And how can voters sort of wrestle with those conflicting statements?
Look, there's, I think, a lot of voters in this district who are swing voters who've been wrestling with Trump for 10 years, right? And they could see themselves in me. So I think I connect authentically with those voters who've tried to figure out the terms of engagement with Trump. When President Obama got elected, when Trump got elected and President Obama invited him to the White House, he said maybe the White House will sober him. Maybe he'll find religion, And my whole thing was, look, I'm Palestinian and Mexican American. My existence is the resistance. He opposes everything I am as a person. But we still have to work with him on certain things, where Operation Warp Speed, infrastructure, prescription drugs, and oppose him where possible. Those comments, I think context is very important. I think there's a lot of people in the Democratic Party, you'll see today, maybe it was prophetic, a lot of people are frustrated with the Democratic brand. And I think, I was sharing that frustration. But instead of abdicating, I think what we need to do is make sure that people who want to take big, bold swings at problems, who want to unrig our political system so that it's not just dark money politics, influencing campaigns. There's a group called Democratic Majority for Israel that's spending $750,000 to attack me simply because I'm Palestinian American. They're not even talking about Israel. They're attacking me on other issues, but that's their whole point, is to attack candidates for their views on Israel. And they're not even talking about that. So I've been on the receiving ends of like our broken system. And when I talked about saying keeping an open mind, I of course voted for Joe Biden. He endorsed me. What I was saying there, and the full context is, keep an open mind. If you're a Republican, listen to me, hear what I have to say, and then make up your mind. Just like I'm going to listen to the debate. So I was trying to exemplify an open mind. But of course, in isolation, some of these things will be seen as...
I think, you were running in a pretty conservative district. This was not, and it was not in either of those races on anyone's card as a pickup opportunity.
This wasn't happening. These interviews weren't happening.
So I do understand that, but I'm not sure if I'll vote for the president seems a little bit more than hey, I'm Ammar from East County. I recognize your values. Culturally, and you can expect me to respect yours as well. That strikes me as something that would be sort of on the table as open-minded, willing to understand where people come from. But, I'm not sure who I'll vote for president.
Well, I didn't say that.
Okay.
I said, you assume that I'm going to vote for a Democrat for simply being a Democrat. I want to see how people perform. And that's what I was trying to exemplify, that open-mindedness to the voters, to say, hey, don't just assume that you vote down party line. I, of course, was always going to vote for Joe Biden. But I was trying to exemplify to them the open-mindedness I was hoping that they would have as well. And, I'm proud to have worked for the Obama administration. I'm proud of, what I'm fighting for now. And, and for me, I think that there is corruption that exists. Democrats have to be self-critical. I mean, these comments were made in 2020, but if you read them in 2024, there's a lot of Democrats who are like, is Joe Biden the person? You know what I mean? So
that's true.
So I think that maybe these comments were, they were things I should have been more clear about, but kind of ahead of their time, if we're being honest, in a way, right?
Well, so similarly, you mentioned, dark money, getting money out of politics. Now, your partner is Representative Sara Jacobs, and I don't think there's anybody who would say that it's a scandal to have a girlfriend. That's reasonable and totally understandable. The question I have for you is, money out of politics. You have nonetheless received a significant financial benefit in this race from your relationship with Sara Jacobs. She's one of the wealthiest members of Congress, and those financial benefits have come to your campaign. If it's important to unbreak the system and to reform that, what do you make of the sort of situation you're in right now, where you have ability to communicate with voters pretty significantly, based not necessarily on their donations flowing to you, but other opportunities you have to receive money?
So we've raised over $1 million from 40,000 individual donors.
Sure.
Those donations,
it's easy to raise money when you have money, right? Like, Brandon Riker is able to raise a lot of money, but he's also been able to self-fund to, reach out to voters and say, would you like to communicate? So, there's a bit of a virtuous cycle between having money and getting more money.
Well, when I ran in 2018, this was before any of this, we also raised good money. I think it's our message. We've been able to be resonant throughout my career. We've won every single primary despite these misattributions. And I think that, it takes away from the 40,000 people who've given to my campaign to just focus on 12 people, for example. I'm very grateful for the support that I've received. These are people who've given to causes throughout the entire county, and to our party, and to even people who are running in this race. The thing about our campaign that's allowing us to lead in the polls and everything else is that we've built something over the years that can't be bought in a single cycle, let alone 6 months. Despite what Democratic Majority for Israel tries to do and other groups, we've built something from the roots up. And that's why we're enjoying this support. It's deep. It's not just kind of we know his name. Because I've been on the receiving end of a lot of attacks, and the reason people have faith in me is because instead of attacking other candidates, my focus is fighting for these people. And I've been called a lot of things throughout my career, but I've never been called a quitter. And people want somebody who will have that fighting spirit on their behalf every single day. And it's fair for people to ask, well, what is it you stand for? And for me, it's overturning Citizens United, codifying Roe v. Wade, dismantling and overhauling this rogue organization, and then not just defending democracy, but democratizing our economy with a federal minimum wage increase, a federal wealth tax, universal health care, permitting reform to build and buy more housing, right? If we don't do those things, then I worry this will be the last time Democrats will ever have a chance to take office. We have to deliver between elections, not just after them.
Yeah. So, I've seen you mention on the campaign trail before that, all these things that we talk about, that's not the type of stuff you hear when you're actually out at forums, that you hear people talk about cost of living primarily.
Surprisingly, the thing I've been hearing the most, to be honest, is ICE and immigration and the war. And it's tied to costs, which I'm very surprised by, because I was in San Marcos at the Spring Fling, and we had these little Iowa style where we were doing the whole coffee bean thing. And the thing that people put their coffee bean in the most was ICE and immigration and the war, which I was surprised by. But the war is shorthand for the cost of gas. It's shorthand for the cost of electricity and everything else. And obviously we're a big military community, so we feel the cost in many different ways. So not to interrupt, but those are things that I would have thought that cost of living would have been the number one issue. But, the wisdom of the voters and constituents, they say that it is, but also we're worried about these things as well.
A quick word. We are trying our best to cut through the noise. If you're still here, you are exactly who we want watching this show. So please, click the subscribe button to help us continue on our journey to give you the very best San Diego politics content.
So on the war, and you said the war is in some ways, or for a lot of people, maybe a proxy for their understanding that this is going to hit them in the gas tank.
$6, $7, diesel $8. It's real. People feel it.
How should Congress respond to that? Given that the war has happened. Right. Can't undo it. It's going to be, it's going to play out for a number of months still, regardless of how things work out with whether this ceasefire holds or whether it becomes something permanent.
Right.
So what is a reasonable response that Congress could push for right away?
This is a very personal question to me for a couple layers that you could imagine. Number one, if this war continues, there's a chance as a reservist that me and my shipmates could be deployed. And we're prepared to do that if this war ever comes to our gates. We're prepared to do that. I think it's important that the Supreme Leader was removed from the battlefield. He has the blood of Americans on his hands. But as a Palestinian American whose father immigrated here from a war-torn part of the world, I don't want to see us get into another forever war. And regime change does not work in the Middle East. We've tried it. It does not work. So I think if I was advising the president, I'd say take the win, have a strategic end state and exit, and reset this and find a political solution to this conflict. Look, Iran's hyper motivated, right? They're not like they're driven by a different set of motives where they're willing to die for what they believe in, and they're not rational actors in some ways. But I think we could create a coalition with the Gulf states and others to be able to kind of find a way to strategically exit, to open the Strait of Hormuz again, to bring down costs, and to make sure that there aren't more people who are dying in a war that has no clear objectives, lines of efforts, or end state. And there's already 7 reservists. The first to die in this war were 7 reservists in Kuwait last month. So I would urge this president, number one, to request authorization from Congress, and number 2, find a strategic exit as soon as possible.
So you mentioned your role as a reservist. That's something that's happened since you were introduced to San Diego voters. You joined the Navy Reserves, became an officer. There was at least 10 days or so in this race that was sort of defined by that. I was on your campaign website yesterday, and there remain photos of you in your uniform, but they have a more fulsome stipulation about
the disclaimer, the DoD disclaimer.
The DoD disclaimer. Do you, based on that controversy, do you think that some of the attacks were fair, that you were either misrepresenting or inappropriately using your service in part of a political campaign?
I'm proud of my service, and there's a lot of service members in our county who do the same. John McCann is a commander in the Navy Reserves. Jim Desmond is a Navy veteran. And so I think this is just part of the Murdoch empire attacking me, the New York Post and others. So I think that's just a reflection of the partisanship of this race. And maybe there are some people in the New York Post who don't like seeing a guy who has a no-shave chit who's serving in the military. But I'm proud of my service, and I talked to my command and the Navy and Chinfo, the Chief of Naval Information in the Pentagon, and they said, you were spot on, you're good to go. And since then, we've received the endorsement of Vote Vets, who's out there campaigning for me as we speak, doing great TV ads, getting our message across. I'm proud of my service. I'm proud of, to have signed the dotted line, and I'm willing to fight for my country if my nation calls upon me. The reason I joined is because I revere our service members, those who've served and those who've paid the ultimate sacrifice. So I think this is more kind of inside baseball. The veterans I talk to are proud to stand with me, and I'm even prouder to stand with them.
Great. And so now there is a sort of an emerging split within the Democratic Party in general. It's been evident in this race between how members of the Democratic Party feel the federal government should be positioned towards Israel.
Right.
So, I read an op-ed that you wrote for the Union Tribune back in 2021. You had one interesting quote in it, which was after recounting the upshot of a number of different attacks that had been going from Gaza to Israel and from Israel to Palestine, that it was leading to a 20-to-1 casualty disparity.
Right.
And you said, clearly this is an asymmetrical warfare, not a war between two nations on equal footing.
Right.
Given that, do you believe the U.S. should shut off arms sales to Israel?
So, a couple things. Asymmetrical warfare, another word for that is terrorism, right? Those are just numbers that there's been a lot of loss of life. I've lost 30 members of my family in Gaza. This is not an abstraction to me.
Yeah.
This is
People
personal.
should know you lived in Gaza from when you were 8 to 12 years old.
Exactly. Yeah, I was born here. I lived there. I still remember the sights and sounds of the war. And I may have seen more conflict and war as a child than I may ever see in the future, which is something jarring to contemplate. I believe personally that you could respect Israel with thinking that you have to get rid of Netanyahu. You could love Palestinians, as I do, with thinking that Hamas needs to be removed from Gaza. And you could love this country and disagree with Trump. I think that's the only morally consistent position to take. And I believe in enforcing the Leahy laws across the board, whether it's Egypt or Israel or the Emirates or Saudi Arabia. So that's what I believe, is that we should make sure that our dollars are spent in a way that aligns with our values. And I think Netanyahu has committed war crimes. If I gave the orders that Netanyahu gave or followed them, I would be court-martialed. And so I think Netanyahu is somebody who is not just a problematic leader for the world and for America, but even in his own country. So I would like to see Netanyahu go. I'd like to see Hamas go. and I'd like to see Trump go. And if we do that, then we have a chance at resetting this relationship. And the Palestinians haven't had an election in like 20 years. Like the average age of a Palestinian is 18 years old. They weren't even alive when Hamas got elected, and the world has changed. So I would like to see us, have our alliances, but hold them accountable, hold them to the same standards we hold ourselves, and also make sure that we invest in peace, prosperity. And I think that the fates and futures, as I said, of Palestinian children and Israeli children are inextricably bound. Divorce is not an option. We have to find a way to treat both with dignity and recognize the inherent value and the right for both peoples to exist.
Okay. So I don't mean to be reductive. That was a comprehensive answer, but support arms sales to Israel?
So the Leahy laws have to be enforced, right? So if they are not enforced by any country, whether it's Egypt or Israel or anybody else, then they have to be, that there is conditions to aid to countries. And those conditions are stipulated in the Leahy laws. So if Leahy laws are violated by any country, then those conditions should be set and funding should be withheld. We've seen it happen before. We've seen Reagan and others in Bush Senior say, look, I can't do this if you're going to continue prosecuting the war this way. So, but I think it's important to understand that the relationships that our countries have should not be held hostage by a rogue actor like Netanyahu, who came into our Situation Room the first time a foreign leader has done that. So I do think that we have to hold Netanyahu accountable. And I think we have to have tough conversations with our allies when they make these mistakes. But I'll be very honest with you, like, what happened to the Palestinians is a mass atrocity, and it is unacceptable. And I lay that at the feet of Netanyahu. And my hope is that the people of Israel throw this man out of office, because I do not think the Jewish people are safer in this world because of him. I think his leadership has actually made their lives more dangerous. And the same thing is true for the Palestinians, including my family members who are dead now because of Hamas's failed leadership.
All right, so I want to ask one more question, which is, I understand an odd thing to put you in the position to answer, but some people vote strategically.
Yeah.
In fact, this district was created specifically as a Democratic pickup opportunity. This was not, by anyone's understanding, following normal rules of redistricting. This was gerrymandered to create a new Democratic seat.
In response to Texas.
Sure, by all accounts.
And it's temporary.
Up until 2030.
Right.
But for people who are casting this vote, good Democrats who want to see that pickup opportunity capitalized upon, and they see that you've lost 3 times, including most recently, and I think the most recent one is the one that's really significant here, which is in Chula Vista for the mayor's race. Chula Vista has a Democratic registration advantage, an even bigger Democratic registration advantage than the 48th district, and they currently have a Republican mayor after the race that you ran in 2022. So voters who feel that way, voters who maybe are nodding in agreement listening to your interview right now and saying that they think that you're hitting the right notes, but they are worried that you can't win when it comes to November because you haven't yet.
Right.
How do you respond to that?
Well, look, a couple things. When I ran for Congress in this seat, it was an R+15 district. We outperformed Joe Biden and Gavin Newsom and Adam Schiff. We got more votes than any Democrat in this district's history. If we perform that way again, we will win this race. There are some candidates who have won, but they won by underperforming Joe Biden by 8 points. If that happens here, they're going to lose. They won by taking special interest money, which is the whole problem in this whole system, this rigged system, is that we have elected officials who are profit makers and not policy makers. So how you run matters. And for me, I have really tried to align myself with the voters at great cost, right? Like trying to understand what keeps them up at night, what gets them going in the morning. And throughout my entire political career, it's always been about what do the voters need? And how do I align my values with them? And there's always been that tension in Republican districts. But now this district is newer, it's bluer, it has the parts that I've won, and it fits me just right. I think that politics has changed significantly since even that last race, and I wouldn't be running if I didn't feel like, 1, we could win, and 2, that we had a message that met this moment, defending our democracy, taking on ICE, taking on Trump, restoring the power to declare war and tariffs to Congress, but also democratizing our economy, federal minimum wage increase, federal wealth increase, universal health care, and everything else. And that's something that I think distinguishes me from everybody else. I've taken on the toughest fights this county has to offer, and we've always shown that we're willing to be in this fight. And this is going to be a fight, and I'm ready for it. They're looking for us to finally bring this home. And my job over the next couple of weeks is to show voters that we could win this time. And I think the wind's at our backs, and we're ready to do it.
All right, I'll let that be the last word.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
I'm back with Andy, and I just want to say a quick word before we go. I want to reach out to Jim Desmond specifically. Jim, we've reached out to your campaign a couple of times now. We very much want to have you on the show. We want Andy to interview you. We are trying to give our audience a full sense of the race in the 48th, and we can't do that without you. So we hope you will come on, and sooner rather than later. And I think we'll leave it there. Pretty good episode. Hope you've enjoyed it, and until next time, look after one another and be kind.